If you're watching this, you're 100% a horror fanatic and we approve. Let us know where you are watching this from and be a part of our community. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means everything. Let's start. This happened over 20 years ago, but I still remember it as clearly as if it happened yesterday. At the time, I was driving home with my girlfriend after spending Christmas Eve at my aunt's place in a small town called Estata. My mom's side of the family always threw a big Christmas Eve party there, and this year was no different. It was the first time my girlfriend was meeting my family, so I was a little anxious about how she'd feel being surrounded by so many new faces. But as the evening went on, my nerves faded. She blended right in, chatting with my aunts, uncles, and cousins like she'd known them for years. They all seemed to like her, and she looked like she was genuinely having a good time. The night was filled with conversation, poker games, exchanging gifts, and plenty of drinks. By the time we decided to head home, it was pretty late, and my girlfriend was exhausted, so I offered to drive. It was around 11 p.m. as we made our way out of town, cruising along the familiar country roads. I was behind the wheel of her car. That stretch of highway is surrounded by farmland and dense forests, with long patches where there are no streetlights at all. But I wasn't concerned. I grew up around there and knew every turn and bend in the road by heart. We were just driving, enjoying each other's company, two young people chatting, laughing, feeling content after a good night. Eventually, we reached a long, steep hill that sloped down toward Deep Creek. On either side of the road, thick, dark forest pressed in. There weren't any houses, no lights, just complete darkness beyond the glow of our headlights. I drove down the hill, crossed the bridge over Deep Creek, and started climbing the other side. That's when something suddenly bolted across the road, so fast I barely had time to react. I slammed the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the cold pavement. Both of us tensed up, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart racing. My girlfriend nodded, still staring out the windshield. "Yeah, but I couldn't tell what it was. At first, we thought maybe it was a coyote common in that area, but something about it felt off. The way it moved, the strange, uneasy feeling it left behind. It didn't sit right with me. For reasons I can't fully explain, I decided to turn the car around and check it out. I flipped on the high beams, lighting up the stretch of forest where whatever it was had disappeared. Leaving the car running, I stepped out and walked cautiously toward the tree line. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. The forest was quiet, still. I scanned the area, but nothing caught my eye. That creeping doubt started to settle in. Maybe I was being reckless, chasing shadows. Then suddenly, the car's horn blasted. Long, loud, and continuous. It wasn't a quick tap. It was a full, urgent blare that made my heart leap into my throat. I spun around and hurried back to the car. My girlfriend was sitting there, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, her face pale. "Why'd you honk like that?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but the edge in my voice gave me away. She didn't answer right away, just lifted her hand and pointed toward a spot about 50 feet away, near where I had been standing moments earlier. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw him, a man, completely covered in mud and dirt, emerging from the shadows. His clothes were tattered, his face grimy, and in one hand, he held a small hatchet. The way he looked at us made my skin crawl. His expression was wild, his eyes almost vacant, but his mouth stretched into a twisted, unsettling grin. He waved at us casually, as if running into strangers in the woods with a weapon was perfectly normal. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back into the darkness of the forest. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. I jumped back in the car, and we took off down the road as fast as I could manage. the adrenaline pounding in my veins. It wasn't until we were safely back on the main highway that my girlfriend finally explained what had happened. While I was searching the woods, the man had actually circled around, quietly slipping out of the forest from another direction, well beyond the reach of our headlights. She caught a glimpse of him moving toward me, his hatchet raised as he approached. That's why she honked, to warn me before he got any closer. When we finally got home, still shaken, we called the police. They sent a patrol car out, but we never heard if they actually found anyone. Or maybe they did and just didn't tell us. The officer we spoke to said they believed the man had been hiding near the road, likely looking for someone traveling alone. An ambush, plain and simple. We both agreed, if it weren't for my girlfriend's quick thinking, I probably wouldn't have seen him until it was too late. To this day, I don't like to think about what might have happened if she hadn't been there. This happened to me early last year, and honestly, it still gives me chills whenever I think about it. I'm 27 now, and for about a year, I've been doing food deliveries for Uber Eats to make some extra cash. It's a pretty straightforward job, nothing complicated, but the pay isn't exactly great, especially during late-night shifts. Usually, any orders I get after 10 p.m. are cheap fast food runs, and hardly anyone tips. Seriously, I'd say maybe 2 out of 10 people tip on Uber Eats. Because of that, I normally avoid late-night deliveries altogether. But that night, there was a special promotion running. Complete 15 deliveries within a specific window and get an extra $75. That bonus made those late-night hours tempting. With empty roads and no traffic, it was easy to power through the deliveries and finish quickly. So I went for it. I was on a roll, and by 2:30 in the morning, I had just wrapped up my final order. A McDonald's delivery, earning my bonus. After that, I called it a night and started heading home. For some context, this all happened in downtown San Diego. The heart of downtown is lively. Bars, restaurants, clubs, but the farther out you go, the rougher the area gets. Homeless camps pop up on random corners, and the vibe shifts fast. I usually avoid those spots, but to get home and hop onto the freeway, I had no choice but to pass through them. I drive an old 2002 Ford Focus. It's nothing fancy and definitely not modern manual locks, manual windows. To roll the windows up or down, I have to lean over and crank them by hand. Because it's a pain to do that constantly during deliveries, I usually just keep both windows down for convenience. That night was no different. My plan was to roll up the windows before I passed 16th Street, the area known for a large homeless encampment, but I didn't get the chance. As I turned down a smaller side street to reach the main road, I noticed a man standing ahead on the side of the street. He was wearing one of those reflective orange construction vests. In downtown San Diego, there's always some kind of roadwork happening at night, so at first, I didn't think much of it. But as I got closer, things got weird. Suddenly, the man darted into the middle of the road, waving his arms, signaling for me to stop. My first thought was that maybe he was redirecting traffic or flagging me down because of construction. I slowed my car, cautiously leaving some space between us to assess the situation. But then he started jogging toward my car. Before I could react, he was standing directly in front of me, blocking the entire road. He was too close for me to drive around him, and I felt an instant wave of unease. It was 3 a.m., the street was poorly lit, and besides me and this guy, no one else was around. It hit me how vulnerable I was. Windows down, parked in the middle of a dark street, alone. I've always wondered how I'd react in a real fight-or-flight situation. Turns out my reaction was to freeze. As I sat there, frozen, my mind finally caught up with my gut, and I realized something was definitely wrong. The guy wasn't a construction worker. Sure, he had the hard hat and reflective vest, but it didn't take much to throw on a uniform like that. His smile was the real giveaway. the kind of unsettling, teeth-baring grin that lasted way too long. If you've ever tried smiling for 5 seconds straight without blinking or looking away, you'll know how unnatural it feels. That's what this guy was doing. Just standing there, grinning at me. Now that he was up close, I could see more clearly. He looked older, maybe in his late 50s or 60s, but with homelessness and life on the streets, it's hard to tell. His eyes were wild, darting around like he hadn't slept in days, but his creepy grin never wavered. He reminded me of Twisty the Clown from American Horror Story, except there was no mask to hide behind. In hindsight, I should have thrown the car in reverse and peeled out of there, but in that moment, panic had me frozen in place. Without warning, the man jumped onto the hood of my car. I just sat there, paralyzed with fear, watching as he started pounding his fists on the hood, crawling around like some kind of deranged animal. The worst part? He never stopped staring at me. His eyes were locked onto mine the entire time, unblinking. His grin stretched wide across his face. He didn't say a word, just kept pounding the car, crawling on his hands and knees, and staring like he was trying to break me mentally. All I could think about was how vulnerable I was with my windows down. If he decided to lunge through them, I wouldn't be able to stop him. 15 seconds. That's probably how long it lasted. But in the moment, it felt like an eternity. Then, salvation. I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. Another car coming down the street toward us. The man saw them too. Without hesitation, he jumped off my hood and sprinted toward the oncoming car, disappearing into the shadows. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I slammed on the gas and drove off, heart racing, not looking back until I was halfway home on the freeway. Adrenaline had me shaking the entire ride. After that night, I stopped accepting late-night deliveries for a long time. I still won't drive through that part of downtown, even during the day. If I have to pass through sketchy areas now, my windows stay rolled up, always. The whole experience taught me how quickly you can be fooled by appearances. I saw the vest, the hard hat, and I instinctively trusted the situation, thinking, oh, just a worker doing his job. It wasn't until it was too late that I realized how naive that was. To this day, I tell myself that maybe the guy was just unstable, maybe he didn't actually mean harm, but deep down, I know how dangerous that situation could have turned out. And I'll never ignore my instincts like that again. About 5 years ago, when I was around 13, I developed the habit of sneaking out of my bedroom window late at night. It wasn't because I wanted to get into trouble or meet friends. Honestly, I just needed space. The quiet of the world at 1 or 2 a.m. brought me peace, a break from the constant tension at home with my caretakers. Most nights, I'd wander aimlessly through the empty streets, sometimes staying out as late as 3 or 4 in the morning. I never strayed too far from familiar areas, but I loved how silent and still everything felt at that hour. One night, during one of my usual walks, I reached the entrance to a small patch of forest near the edge of town. It wasn't very large, but the trees grew close together, making it pitch black inside. Without a flashlight, it was impossible to see, so I didn't go in that night. The next evening, I brought a flashlight and decided to explore properly. I also grabbed a handful of small sticks and marked my path as I walked, sticking them into the ground to help guide me back. The woods weren't as scary as I expected. In fact, it was peaceful. I didn't see much, just a hedgehog rustling through the leaves, but the stillness and isolation made it feel like my own hidden world. I ended up returning to those woods a few more times over the next week. On my 4th visit, it was lightly raining. The steady drizzle made everything quieter, more eerie, but I liked it. Feeling confident, I didn't bother marking my path this time. I'd memorized the trails by now, or so I thought. About 10 minutes into the forest, I noticed a faint light glowing between the trees far ahead. I turned off my flashlight, crouched down, and waited. But after a few minutes, the light disappeared, so I shrugged it off and kept walking, climbing a few trees along the way, enjoying the solitude. Roughly 25 minutes later, I spotted the light again. Only this time, it was much closer. I quickly switched off my flashlight and scrambled up into a nearby tree, staying hidden among the branches. As the figure with the light approached, I realized it was a man. He looked rough. His breathing was heavy and erratic, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like he was afraid of being followed. His shirt was torn, dirty, and the only other thing he wore were boxers. No shoes, no pants, just a flashlight clutched tightly in one hand. The man stopped about 15 feet away, near the base of my tree, and slumped down onto the ground. From a small bag slung across his shoulder, he pulled out what looked like expensive camera equipment. His hands fumbled nervously through the contents as he kept scanning the dark woods around him. Suddenly, his phone rang. He answered, but didn't say a single word. The call only lasted about 10 seconds before he tossed the phone aside, grabbed his flashlight, and sprinted off deeper into the forest, leaving the bag behind. I waited a few moments, watching until his light completely disappeared into the trees. Once the coast was clear, I cautiously climbed down from my hiding spot and approached the abandoned bag. Inside, I found a high-end camera and a wallet. Just as I was about to grab the wallet to see if I could identify him, I froze. Another light, a different flashlight, was now bobbing between the trees, moving toward the area. Whoever it was, it wasn't the same person as before. Without wasting time, I climbed back up into the same tree and pressed myself against the trunk, heart pounding in my chest. The man's phone, left lying in the dirt, began to ring again. The new person with the flashlight moved toward the sound, scanning the ground. They lingered for a while, searching the area, but never came close enough to find the bag or the phone. Eventually, the light drifted away, swallowed by the woods. I waited a few more minutes to be sure, then climbed down and bolted out of there as fast as I could, my pulse racing the whole time. I made it home around 5 a.m., exhausted and shaken, but unable to sleep. Telling my caretakers was out of the question. They would have been furious if they knew I'd been sneaking out, especially into the forest at night. Instead, the next day, I took a bus to the local police station and explained everything to them. I led one of the officers to the spot in the woods where I'd seen the man and found the bag. But when we arrived, everything was gone. No bag, no phone, nothing. We searched around, but there wasn't a trace left. Over the next few days and weeks, I kept an eye on the news, waiting to see if anything was reported. But there was nothing. No missing person reports. No suspicious activity in the woods. It was like it never happened. After that, I stopped sneaking out at night altogether, and I've never gone back into those woods alone since. I grew up in a small, quiet town tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains. Our house sat halfway up the side of a mountain, looking out over the valley below. For a kid like me who loved the outdoors, it was the perfect place to explore. But there weren't many neighbors nearby, just endless stretches of dense forest and hills. Directly above our house was a ridge that marked the border of a state park. The official trails and public access points were far down in the valley, separated from our property by thick woods and countless no trespassing signs. Because of that, we rarely ever saw hikers wandering onto our land. A dirt road ran from our house up to the ridge, where the charred remains of an old, burned-down cabin still stood. From there, you could follow the ridge to a wide, flat area that was a favorite hangout spot for my dad and his hunting buddies. One of his friends had even set up a trail camera there during the off-season to keep track of the wildlife. We had plenty: coyotes, bobcats, black bears, mountain lions, and more deer than you could count. If you kept following the ridge, you'd eventually reach a clearing with massive, flat rocks and a towering electrical line that stretched over the mountaintop. The rocks were great for climbing, and the view was unbeatable. It became one of my favorite spots to hang out, especially with our black lab, Felicia. I'd bring snacks, a book, and sometimes spend hours up there, reading or just enjoying the peace. One early fall afternoon, when I was about 13, I packed a backpack with food and my latest book and headed up to the clearing. I made sure to avoid the trail camera. It was one of the old film types, and I'd already been scolded in the past for messing around near it and wasting entire rolls of film. I reached my usual rock by the edge of the clearing, near the power lines, and settled in with my book. But not long after I started reading, Felicia suddenly stiffened. Her ears perked up, and she began barking and growling aggressively toward the dense brush down the steep slope. At first, I didn't think much of it. She loved to chase deer, but this time was different. She didn't run off. Instead, she stayed close, hackles raised, snarling at something hidden in the undergrowth on the mountainside. That part of the slope led down into the state park, but it was steep, tangled with briars and weeds. Years ago, they had cleared it to build the electrical tower, but nature had taken it back with a vengeance. The only real access point was way down by the official park entrance, which is why I was surprised, no, unsettled, when a man came pushing through the thorns, scrambling up from that direction. Nervously, I called out, "Hello?" gripping Felicia's collar. She had a bad habit of jumping on people when excited, and the last thing I needed was her knocking someone down the mountain. My parents had already argued about potential lawsuits after she accidentally bowled over a jogger on one of the park trails. The man grinned as he struggled free from the brush, stepping onto the clearing at the base of my rock. Something about him immediately felt off. Maybe it was Felicia's low growl that never eased up, or the strange way he had approached through the hardest, most overgrown path. Either way, my instincts told me to be cautious. He looked normal enough on the surface. Mid to late 20s, average height and build, dressed like any hiker you might see out here. But the way he looked at me, like he was sizing me up, sent a chill down my spine. "Hey there," he greeted, still smiling. "Where'd you come from?" There was something off about his voice. No accent. Everyone around here had a noticeable Appalachian drawl. We didn't get many outsiders, especially not this deep into private land. "I live just down the hill," I answered cautiously. "I was hiking with my dog." He glanced at Felicia, still growling beside me. "She's a nice dog. You really should keep her on a leash, though. You wouldn't want to get in trouble with the park." "We leash her when we're in the park," I replied flatly. "But this is private property." He didn't react to the fact that he was technically trespassing. His smile just stayed plastered to his face. "Yeah, well, you're close enough. You never know who you might run into up here. Nobody from the park comes this far up," I said, starting to get irritated. "I'm from the park," he claimed. "One of the rangers. I was just checking the property. You know, make sure everything's safe." His smile widened. "What would you have done if she attacked me? You could get in a lot of trouble." The uneasy feeling in my gut turned into dread. We only had one ranger in the area, and he was a family friend. This guy, I had never seen him before in my life. Too scared to call him out on the lie, I clipped Felicia's leash onto her collar, stood up, and slung my backpack over my shoulders. "Sorry," I said quickly. "We'll get out of your way. I was heading home anyway." "Your parents know you're up here?" he asked casually. "Yeah, they expect me back soon." I lied, hoping it sounded convincing. "Do they come up here much?" "My dad does," I answered, fabricating more lies as I went. "He comes to check the trail cameras." For the first time, the stranger's smile faltered. Trail cameras. Yeah, I said, trying to sound confident. There are a bunch of them up here. Dad and his friends hunt up this way. The man's smile returned, but it was colder now. Perfect spot for hunting, he muttered, taking a small step toward me. Felicia lunged, snarling and snapping her jaws. It nearly yanked the leash out of my hands, but I managed to hold her back just in time. The man didn't flinch. You should head back, he said calmly. Hold on to that leash tight. Maybe I'll see you around up here again sometime. Maybe, I replied, already deciding I'd never come up to this ridge alone again. I tugged Felicia away, keeping my eyes on him as I walked. He stood there, watching me with that same unsettling grin, unmoving. Once I was out of sight, I picked up the pace. Felicia kept glancing over her shoulder, still growling under her breath. I heard branches snapping behind me a few times, but when I looked back, there was no one there. I cut straight across the clearing, not even caring about the trail camera I normally avoided. I just wanted to get home. Once we reached the dirt road leading down the mountain, I unclipped Felicia's leash and jogged the rest of the way. She stayed glued to my side the whole time. At first, I didn't tell my parents about the man. They already worried about me hiking alone, and I didn't want to get banned from the woods altogether. By the time I got home, I had almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. Maybe he really was a hiker trying to scare me with the ranger story. But later that week, my dad came home furious. His friend had gone up to check the trail camera, and when he developed the film, he discovered it had been turned off almost immediately. Only a handful of photos had been taken. Dad wanted to know if I had been messing with it. I denied everything, scared of getting in trouble. But then I remembered the stranger. When I finally told my dad about him, he was skeptical. He thought I was making it up to avoid blame. But after calling the real park ranger to ask if there was someone new assigned to the area, we learned there wasn't. The ranger also mentioned something else. A campground worker had reported an out-of-state man camping illegally behind the campgrounds the weekend before. He was described as young, average-looking, very friendly. A few days later, Dad's friend developed the rest of the film from the trail camera. There were barely any photos, but the last one, it was of me and Felicia crossing the clearing, hurrying home. Looking back, I'm glad I mentioned the fake trail cameras to that stranger. Maybe he gave up searching for the real ones when he couldn't find any. My parents eventually sold the house and moved down to the valley, into a proper neighborhood. I've since moved out of town entirely. The house fell into disrepair and was eventually lost to a fire. No one lives there now, but the ridge clearing, the hunters still go there. And sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder if that man ever came back. This happened a few years ago, during the summer when I was taking extra college classes. We had a long weekend coming up in June, a full 3 days off, and I figured it was the perfect chance to get outside and do some hiking in the Virginia wilderness. After searching online, I found a state park with some decent trails and decided that would be my destination. I packed my backpack with everything I'd need: food, water, a tent, clothes, and basic camping gear. I also made sure to text my roommate and my family, letting them know exactly where I'd be hiking, just in case something went wrong. As I got close to the park, I passed a little outdoor shop that catered to hikers, especially those doing sections of the Appalachian Trail. Figured it wouldn't hurt to stop in and grab a physical map of the area. While I was chatting with the owner, he mentioned a lesser-known trail not far from the park boundaries. He told me it led to a hidden waterfall and swimming hole. Supposedly a beautiful, quiet spot that most people didn't know about. It sounded perfect. I asked him to point it out on the map, and he did. It was technically outside the park, but he said it was worth the detour. I bought the map, thanked him, and sent an updated message to my roommate and parents to let them know I'd be taking a different trail than planned. Then I parked my car and set off. The first part of the hike was along a section of the Appalachian Trail. It was fairly busy with other hikers, and I even chatted with a few people along the way. But as I moved further from the main routes, the crowds thinned out until eventually, it was just me and the forest. It was early afternoon by the time I was a few miles from the waterfall, and that's when I noticed it. Everything had gone unnaturally silent. No birds, no buzzing insects, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. On top of that, I got the unmistakable feeling that I was being watched. I tried to shrug it off as nerves. Maybe I was just overthinking things. But the further I hiked, the heavier the feeling became. Eventually, I reached the waterfall. It wasn't quite as impressive as I had hoped, but it was still a nice spot to relax. The swimming hole was a good size, and with no one else around, it was peaceful. Or at least it should have been. I stripped down and went for a quick swim. As I got dressed afterward, I started absent-mindedly whistling a song that had been stuck in my head all morning. Chill Bill. And that's when I heard it. Someone or something whistled the exact same tune back to me. At first, I thought it must be a bird mimicking the sound. Some species are good at that. Curious, I whistled again. Copied me perfectly. We went back and forth for a few minutes, and I'll admit, at first, I thought it was kind of cool. But as I started setting up camp nearby, the eerie feeling crept back in. Goosebumps covered my arms. My instincts were practically screaming at me that something wasn't right. As night fell, the forest remained dead silent. I built a small fire and cooked dinner with my jet boil, but the quiet was unnerving. Felt wrong, like the woods were holding their breath, watching me. Still, I convinced myself I was being paranoid and eventually crawled into my tent with a flashlight and a book. Surprisingly, I managed to fall asleep without incident, but the next morning shattered any illusion of safety. I woke up to find my campsite completely trashed. My camp stool was gone. The bear bag I'd hung with my food, cut down. Not chewed through, not torn, cut clean as if with a sharp blade. Keep in mind, I was deep in the wilderness, at least 6 to 8 miles from the nearest road. As I examined the damage, I heard a loud snap from somewhere in the trees. My head whipped around, but I saw nothing. Then, the whistling started again. It was the same tune from yesterday, Chill Bill. But this time it sounded wrong. Sinister. It sent a chill down my spine, and I knew then I needed to get out of there. Fast. The whistling grew louder, closer, surrounding me from all directions. I shoved my gear into my pack, not bothering to organize anything. The whistling continued relentlessly, circling me. Fed up, I stood up and yelled into the trees, hoping to scare off whoever, or whatever, was messing with me. The whistling stopped. For a second, everything went quiet. Then, from somewhere hidden in the forest, I heard my own voice, distorted and crackling like it was coming from an old, broken radio. Repeat exactly what I had just shouted. Panic surged through me. I threw my pack over my shoulder and sprinted back the way I came. Behind me, I could hear it, the thing, switching between whistling and mimicking my voice. It stayed close, almost playful, like it was toying with me but never getting too near. Eventually, the sound faded. I slowed down, cautiously looking behind me. I wish I hadn't. From right beside me, an ear-splitting screech erupted. It was so loud, so sharp, it felt like it wasn't just around me. It was inside my head. I didn't look back again. I just ran. Less than half a mile later, I stumbled across a couple who were also backpacking. They looked startled when they saw me, probably because I must have looked terrified. They asked if I had been the one screaming. I quickly told them everything. Their faces went pale, and they made it clear they wouldn't be heading down the trail I had just come from. Together, we headed toward a more populated section of the trail. When I finally reached my car, I drove straight to the nearest ranger station and reported what had happened. Since I had been hiking just outside the state park, they said it technically wasn't their jurisdiction, but they'd send someone to check the area. As I got back to my Jeep, preparing to leave, I heard it again. That same familiar tune, Chill Bill, whistled softly from the tree line. Needless to say, I didn't waste any time getting out of there. When I got home and explained everything to my roommate, he just shook his head and said, "Dude, I'm never going camping with you." And honestly, I don't blame him. I didn't get my driver's license as early as most people. Living in the city, I never really needed it. Between walking, public transport, and ride-sharing apps like Uber, getting around was never an issue. I took Uber almost daily, especially for commuting to and from work. Over time, I got familiar with a lot of the regular drivers in the area. Unfortunately, not every ride was entirely comfortable. A few drivers made me uneasy here and there, but nothing ever crossed the line. At least not until one particular ride that still unsettles me to this day. I was around 22 or 23 years old at the time, working an office job downtown. After finishing late one evening, I ordered an Uber to take me home, like I always did. I didn't recognize the driver when he pulled up, but everything seemed fine at first. We exchanged polite greetings. He confirmed my address and we got going. The driver looked to be in his 30s, a little on the heavier side, with a wide, friendly smile that, at first, seemed harmless enough. But as the ride continued, I noticed him glancing at me through the rearview mirror, a lot more than what felt normal. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You know, I've picked you up before." Given how often I used Uber, that didn't strike me as odd initially. It's a small city. Running into the same driver isn't unheard of. But as the ride went on, the conversation took an uncomfortable turn. He started asking personal questions, where I lived, if I had a boyfriend, what I liked to do for fun. My unease grew with every passing minute. Then came something that made my stomach twist. "Why'd you leave your old job?" he asked casually. Stopped me cold. The job he mentioned, I hadn't worked there since I was 19. It had been years. How did he know that? Suddenly, the little details he casually dropped into conversation started clicking together in my mind. He knew where I'd gone to high school. He mentioned the college I attended, my major, even the town I grew up in. He casually talked about how many siblings I had and threw in small facts about my hometown, as if they were normal topics of small talk. But here's the thing, I've never been a chatty passenger. In all my Uber rides, I always kept conversations short and generic. At most, I'd say something vague like, "I live about 40 minutes away," or, "Yeah, I've got a few siblings." Never specific details. Never enough to piece together my life history. But somehow this man had. And it was clear now, he wasn't just remembering things from casual conversations. He'd been paying attention. The questions became more invasive. He asked if I was single, what year I graduated, where I liked to hang out. Then he casually brought up my male roommate, mentioning him as if it was common knowledge. That's when the anxiety really set in. I kept my answers short, one-word replies, or I'd pretend not to hear him at all. But he didn't take the hint. If anything, he seemed completely oblivious to my discomfort. His questions kept coming, one after the other, each one digging a little deeper into my life. The entire ride only lasted about 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. As we neared my building, the conversation shifted yet again. He started giving me compliments, telling me I had a beautiful smile, that I seemed like such a fun person, and that my name was really pretty. He told me I was smart, attractive, and even said he hoped we'd be paired together again soon because I was his favorite passenger. Right before I stepped out of the car, he smiled wide, turned to face me completely, and said something that still makes my skin crawl. "This is the longest ride we've ever had together." It hit me then, this wasn't some harmless coincidence. He knew me. Somehow he had been keeping track. And clearly, I had ridden with him before without even realizing it. I got out of the car, walked around the side of the building, and waited in the shadows until I saw him drive off. Only then did I report him. Thankfully, this was back when Uber still had human customer service. They assured me they would block him from picking me up again and look into whether he should even be allowed to continue driving for the platform. For the next few weeks, I stuck to the bus and avoided Uber altogether. Luckily, I never saw him again, and I never had another ride quite like that one. But the whole experience still haunts me. The way he remembered details I never willingly shared. The way he kept looking at me like I was some familiar face from a list he'd been keeping in his head. Still creeps me out how much he knew. This happened when I had just started my first year of high school. My dad worked as a pizza delivery driver to support us. Even though it wasn't the most glamorous job, I was proud of him. He worked long hours and always made sure I had what I needed. After a while, we moved into a new house, and that's where everything started. I'll never forget the first night something strange happened. It was around 11:30 p.m. I was lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, when I suddenly heard a child's voice downstairs. A little girl. It started as soft, faint crying, but then it twisted into unsettling laughter. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. First, I brushed it off. Maybe the TV was still on, or maybe my dad made the noise somehow. I got up, walked to the top of the stairs, and peered down into the living room. It was completely dark, not a single light on. I glanced toward my dad's bedroom and saw him lying in bed, still awake. "Hey, did you hear that?" I asked. He looked over just as confused. "I thought that was you. That was just the beginning." Over the next few days, things escalated. My dad started having terrifying nightmares. He told me one morning, with bags under his eyes, that he dreamt something held him down, pinned him to the bed, and a dark, human-like shadow crawled onto his chest. It leaned down, screaming in his face, and suddenly, more voices joined in. Dozens of them, all screaming, all around him. The nightmares got worse after that, but he stopped talking about them. I could tell it unsettled him too much. At first, I tried to be logical. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for all this. Maybe stress, maybe bad dreams and creaky floors. But then the footsteps started. Every day, without fail, we heard them. Above us. Heavy, deliberate steps moving around in the attic, following us no matter where we went inside the house. And then came the flies. I'm not talking about a few insects here and there. I'm talking about thousands. The windows, the corners, the ceiling, they were everywhere. Dead, buzzing, covering the house like something out of a nightmare. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was happening. I didn't want to believe it, but I was starting to. The scariest moment happened not long after. I ended up sleeping next to my dad one night because he'd had another horrible nightmare. We set up in the living room, me on the couch, him on a mattress on the floor. The kitchen was open to the living room, so everything felt exposed. It was sometime after midnight when heavy objects started flying across the room. Cans of food launched from the kitchen as if an invisible force was throwing them at us. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But the worst part? Seeing my dad cry. I had never seen him cry before. He prayed out loud, desperate, begging for whatever was in that house to stop. Eventually, the activity quieted down. but neither of us slept the rest of the night. It was freezing outside, but we even considered sleeping in the car. In the end, we took turns resting, too scared to let our guard down completely. The next day, my dad went to work, and I came home from school. The house was only a 5-minute walk away, but the second I walked in, I could tell something was off. I felt drained, like the life had been sucked out of me. The longer I sat there, the heavier the feeling became. As the sun went down, everything went eerily still. At first, I thought I'd muted the TV by accident, but then I realized I couldn't hear anything. No hum from the fridge, no cars outside, not even the sound of my own breathing. It was like the world had been silenced. And then I saw it, out of the corner of my eye, a flash of light. But it wasn't natural. It didn't feel like it belonged in this world. Suddenly, my right arm burned, an unbearable, searing heat, as if something had touched me. The pain wasn't just physical, it was mental, overwhelming, suffocating. I could barely move. I was terrified, frozen in place. I managed to pick up my phone, my voice barely a whisper as I texted my dad. "Help me." He must have known something wasn't right. Within minutes, he was home. Without saying much, he took me straight to my mom's place. They were divorced and barely spoke, but he didn't care. I crashed at her place, completely exhausted, sleeping for what felt like an entire day. The following day, my dad took me to someone he trusted, a man from our church who specialized in situations like this. People whispered about how he had helped others before. The moment we walked into his office, the man barely let us explain. He calmly told us to sit down, listen quietly, then said exactly what I hoped he wouldn't. "We need to get you out of that house, immediately, and take your pets with you." Our dog and cat had been acting strangely too, always trembling, staring into corners, their eyes darting around the room in sync. I used to laugh about it, before I understood what was really going on. We packed up essentials, grabbed the pets, and checked into a hotel. Our dog and cat stayed at my mom's, though she thought the whole thing was ridiculous. She accused my dad of making it all up for attention. A few days later, the specialist returned to the house, this time with 3 other people. They asked us to meet them there at sunset. The house, it was a disaster. Furniture overturned, objects scattered everywhere, as if the house itself had been ransacked by some unseen force. They told us we needed to remove certain items from the house. I can't remember exactly what they were, those details are fuzzy, but they insisted those things were connected to what had been happening. The house was cleansed, but it took weeks before it finally felt somewhat normal again. To this day, some of the smaller details escape me, but that first moment, the sound of that little girl crying, her innocent sobs twisting into laughter, that still haunts me. And I'll never forget the look in my dad's eyes, the fear, the first time I ever saw him cry. This happened quite a few years back when I was around 10 or 11 years old. The place wasn't exactly in the middle of nowhere, but it was remote enough to feel isolated. My family owns a large stretch of wooded land, over 100 acres, in the southwestern part of the United States. We've had it for generations, and every summer, we gather there for a 5-day family reunion, camping out, cooking meals together, and enjoying the peace of nature. There's a specific area on the property where we always set up camp. To get there, we have to drive through a small, sleepy village and pass through several old metal gates along a narrow dirt road that winds for about 2 miles. The first gate sits just past a set of railroad tracks that cut through the land. I only mention this detail because it becomes important later in the story. Since I'd been exploring that ranch for as long as I could walk, and because it was private property, my parents always trusted me to wander around during the day, as long as I didn't stray too far from the main campsite. I usually passed the time searching for arrowheads buried in the dry dirt, chasing tadpoles in the shallow ponds, or looking for cool rocks and spotting wildlife hidden among the trees. On this particular day, just after we finished an early lunch around 11:30 a.m., I told my mom I was heading down to a nearby creek to try and catch some tadpoles. I was excited because later that afternoon, my cousins had planned a trip to the river for swimming and I didn't want to miss it. The creek wasn't too far, maybe a 15-minute walk, though the path to it was a little tricky. Steep in some areas with slick rocks scattered along the way. I spent about 15 minutes there, wading in the cool water, chasing tadpoles, and trying to find one small enough to bring back to camp in an old water bottle I had with me. When it was time to head back, I had two options. The first was climbing up a steep, rocky slope that cut directly back to camp, a route I normally took because it was faster. The second was a longer, winding trail that wrapped around through the woods. Normally, I wouldn't have hesitated to take the shortcut, but since I didn't have a cap for my water bottle and didn't want to spill the tadpoles or accidentally hurt them, I decided to take the long trail instead. I'd only walked that route once or twice before, always with my dad, but I was confident I could follow it back on my own. The trail was quiet. Too quiet, honestly. The trees on either side pressed in, the only sound being the crunch of my footsteps and the occasional chirp of a bird. As I walked, I kept my eyes on the eroded patches along the trail, hoping to spot arrowheads or interesting stones peeking through the exposed dirt. And then, something happened that I still struggle to explain. It was as if someone flipped a switch in my brain. One moment, I was walking that familiar trail, and the next, everything changed. The surroundings weren't the same. The trees looked different, thicker, unfamiliar. The trail beneath my feet wasn't the one I remembered. And it was dark, completely dark. I was standing near the railroad tracks at the entrance to the ranch, over 2 miles from where I should have been. The cold night air hit my face, and I could hear the faint rustling of the wind. But the scariest part? My mom was right in front of me, shaking me by the shoulders, her voice filled with panic and relief as she called my name. Two things burned into my memory at that moment. The raw mix of fear and frustration in my mom's tear-streaked eyes, and the overwhelming confusion flooding my mind as I tried, and failed, to understand how I got there. The last thing I could remember was walking the trail after leaving the creek. And now, suddenly, it was pitch black, and I was back at the tracks that marked the boundary of our property. It was exactly like that scene from The Butterfly Effect, where the main character blinks and suddenly finds himself in a completely different place and time without any clue how he got there. My parents bundled me into the car and drove me back to camp. When we got there, I checked the time. It was 10:30 p.m. I had been missing for nearly 11 hours. The rest of my family was in full-blown panic mode. The moment I hadn't returned, they had split up to search for me, checking every trail, calling my name, scouring the area with flashlights. My cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone had been looking for me the entire day. The strange part? I wasn't the type of kid to break rules or run off. I'd grown up respecting my parents' trust, and they knew that. That only made them more confused and more frightened by what had happened. I tried explaining to them that I didn't remember how I ended up at the tracks, that I couldn't even recall walking there. But they didn't believe me. They thought I was just embarrassed for getting lost and didn't want to admit it. Their fear turned into frustration as they kept asking me the same questions, hoping for a different answer. But I had none. Even now, years later, I still can't explain what happened. That feeling on the trail, when everything around me seemed to change, when the air grew unnaturally still and the trees looked unfamiliar, it haunts me. And to this day, I can't shake the unsettling thought. Was it just me getting lost? Or was there something else in those woods that day? Something that doesn't want to be explained? Between 2013 and 2019, I worked in outdoor education across various summer camps and wilderness centers throughout Canada, primarily in the province of Ontario. I even spent one unforgettable season guiding in the vast, rugged landscapes of the Rocky Mountains. Having grown up attending sleepaway camps myself and participating in backcountry leadership programs, including multi-day canoe trips, I felt more than prepared when the time came to lead my own group of teenage girls on a 2-week camping expedition. This particular trip took place during my first summer as a counselor. We were setting off from a small wilderness camp located near the Georgian Bay area, embarking on a 14-day canoe and hiking adventure through a region known as Tagani. The Tagani wilderness stretches between remote towns in Ontario, nestled somewhere between North Bay, Southbury, and Timmins. It's famous for its untouched provincial parks, scenic hiking routes, endless canoe paths, and dense boreal forests. The area is also home to the Bear Island Reserve, a place steeped in cultural heritage and sacred history. Our group followed a popular route that started at a small portage near the White River and, after 2 long weeks, would eventually lead us to the main highway for pickup. The journey was incredible, paddling across glassy lakes, navigating thick forests, portaging heavy canoes over uneven terrain, and spending our nights huddled around campfires beneath the wide, star-filled sky. We carried a satellite phone, which allowed us to check in with our camp director daily and use it in case of emergencies. Thankfully, aside from the usual bumps, bruises, and a couple of dehydration scares, everything went smoothly. That is, until the second to last night. As we neared the end of our journey, we made camp on the shore of a small, deserted island in Bear Lake, which sits within the Bear Island Reserve. The setting was picture perfect, the calm water reflecting the moonlight, and across the way, you could see the lights from the main island where the community's residents lived. Despite its beauty, the place had a quiet, unsettling stillness to it. After extinguishing our campfire, we all retreated to our tents, exhausted from the day's travel. But the peace didn't last long. Roughly an hour after we had settled in, I was jolted awake by the distant but unmistakable rumble of a motorboat. At first, I wasn't alarmed. Bear Lake is large, and people frequently use boats to travel to and from the island. But something felt off. The lake had been completely silent for hours, and now, at nearly 11 p.m., the sound of that motor breaking the stillness sent a shiver through me. Suddenly, the engine cut off. In the heavy silence that followed, I could hear raised voices echoing across the water. A man and a woman, clearly in the middle of a heated argument. Their words were impossible to make out, muffled by distance and the trees, but the anger in their voices carried clearly across the water. Then came the scream, a sharp, terrified cry from the woman, followed by a loud splash that sent ripples across the lake. And then nothing, utter silence. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I immediately turned toward the girls' tent, silently praying they were still asleep, oblivious to what I'd just heard. But I wasn't so lucky. I could hear the soft murmur of their voices, frightened and confused. I was just about to unzip my tent and go reassure them when, suddenly, a harsh, blinding light swept across me. The tent lit up like a lantern from the inside as a bright beam scanned across it, then slowly glided over to the girls' tent, illuminating their shadows within. They went quiet instantly. My instincts kicked in. I whispered firmly but calmly, "Stay still. Don't make a sound." The beam drifted back toward my tent, lingering for a moment, before returning to the girls' tent again. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of search party? An accident on the water? Or something worse? Judging by the eerie silence and the timing, I wasn't taking any chances. The light, which I now realized was likely a powerful searchlight mounted to a boat, continued sweeping over the island, methodically scanning the dark shoreline as if looking for something or someone. The longest 5 minutes of my life passed before the light finally disappeared, replaced by the distant hum of the motor starting up again. The boat drifted off into the night, its engine gradually fading into the vast emptiness of the lake. The second they were gone, I scrambled for the satellite phone. I called our camp director and quickly explained what happened. He immediately gave me the contact information for the local authorities, who in turn promised to notify the Bear Island Native Police. Unsurprisingly, none of us slept for the rest of the night. The girls were terrified, and I couldn't stop replaying the sequence of events in my mind. The shouting, the scream, the splash, that beam of light. At the crack of dawn, around 5 a.m., I launched my canoe onto the lake, searching the nearby shoreline and water in case someone had fallen overboard and swam to shore. But there was no sign of anyone. No floating debris. No life jackets. Nothing. After what we had heard and seen, the idea of staying another night was unbearable. I called the camp director again and requested that they arrange an early pickup. Thankfully, they agreed. We paddled hard the rest of the day, our group unusually quiet. I think none of us wanted to voice what we were all thinking. The lingering fear of what might have happened on that lake, and what could have happened to us if we'd made a sound or moved while that light was shining down on our tents. To this day, I still wonder who those people were, and what really happened out there. But some questions, I've learned, are better left unanswered. A couple of weeks ago, my partner and I decided to go on a camping trip along the coast. We both love the outdoors, and since we had a long weekend off from college, it felt like the perfect opportunity to get away from everything. The plan was simple: spend 3 days hiking and camping, stopping at different small towns along the way. We packed our tent, enough food, and all the camping gear we needed, both of us excited to spend a few peaceful nights under the stars. This story takes place at the very first stop on that trip. The first town we stayed in was tiny, barely more than a cluster of homes and farmland scattered along winding roads. It felt abandoned, especially since it was the off-season. We had read online that during peak months, tourists flooded the area because of the nearby ancient ruins. A massive, crumbling city said to date back to the early Roman era. The ruins had a haunting beauty to them, and even just standing near them gave you the unsettling sense that time had forgotten this place. There were about half a dozen campsites in the area, and one in particular had glowing reviews online. Confident that we'd find a spot easily, we didn't bother calling ahead. We just drove straight there. But as soon as we arrived, something felt off. The entire campsite was deserted. No staff, no other campers, not even the faint sound of voices or footsteps. We walked around, knocked on the office door, and called out, but the only response was silence. Through the window, we could see the outdoor bar area. Plates of food still sitting on the table, drinks half finished. It was like whoever had been there had just vanished mid-meal. My boyfriend, let's call him Liam, found it strange that everything was left so wide open, but we shrugged it off at first. Maybe it was one of those small, tight-knit communities where people didn't worry about theft or strangers. Still, the silence clung to the place like fog. We decided to check other nearby campsites. The first one we found was closed. The owner explained their grounds had been messy due to recent storms, but suggested another site we could try. Out of curiosity, Liam asked him about the first campsite, the one that was eerily empty. The man paused, his face unreadable. Then he simply said, "I wouldn't go there. Honestly, just don't." His vague warning made my skin crawl, but we didn't push for more information. Maybe he had a grudge against the owners or something. Unfortunately, the other campsite was closed too. But just as we were about to give up, I spotted a faded sign for the original campsite with a phone number on it. We called and a man answered. He explained that he and his wife ran the place, but they were out for a few hours and wouldn't be back until late that evening. He told us we were welcome to pitch our tent and settle in, and we'd meet them later. Despite our unease, the area around the campsite was beautiful. Lush trees, rolling hills, and a quiet that would have been peaceful under normal circumstances. We set up our tent and left to explore the nearby trails and ruins. Hours passed as we hiked through the eerie, overgrown remains of the ancient city, marveling at how time had weathered the stones and arches. By the time we finished dinner and made our way back, it was nearly 10 p.m. That's when things took a sinister turn. When we returned, the campsite was still completely abandoned. No owners, no other guests, not a soul in sight. The place felt darker now, almost suffocatingly quiet. Liam called the owners again. This time, the man explained they had decided not to return that night, but we could still stay if we wanted. We could leave the payment under a mat by the office door. He also mentioned that the kitchen and restrooms were unlocked if we needed them. As the phone call ended, I noticed Liam's whole demeanor had shifted. His usual calmness was gone, replaced by a nervous, watchful energy. The campsite was enormous and unlit, and the surrounding trees looked darker than they had during the day. I could tell Liam was unsettled. "Why would they leave their property wide open like this?" he whispered, glancing around. "Especially with strangers here." I offered to leave and find a guest house instead. He agreed and pulled out his phone to use the flashlight while I started packing. But even as I folded up the tent, I noticed he couldn't stand still. His eyes scanned the area constantly, the flashlight beam darting across the empty lot and tree line. "Just hurry up," he snapped, sharper than usual. His voice was low, but filled with tension. We shoved the tent and gear into our bags as fast as possible. Even though I tried to stay calm, an uncomfortable knot twisted in my stomach. Something about that place felt deeply wrong. The road back to town was empty, lined with trees that swallowed the weak glow of our flashlight. After walking in silence for a few minutes, Liam finally spoke. "There's something I didn't want to tell you while we were still there," he admitted, his voice hushed. "I didn't want to freak you out." My heart started racing. "What?" I asked, already regretting it. He hesitated, then said, "I swear I saw someone hiding by the cabins, and again by the bathrooms, twice." I stopped walking, every hair on my body standing up. "No one's supposed to be there," I whispered, trying to convince myself it had been an animal, maybe a stray dog or a deer. But Liam shook his head. "It wasn't an animal," he said firmly. "It was a person, standing there, watching, and when I looked again, they were gone." That explained his frantic scanning of the area, his sharp tone, his constant urging to be quiet. The rest of the walk back to town was a blur. I couldn't stop glancing behind us, expecting to see a shadow moving through the trees. We practically ran the last stretch to the lit streets, relief only settling in when we reached a small guest house, booked a room, and locked the door behind us, twice. Normally, I'm the skeptical one. I don't scare easily. But that night, I believed him. I still do. Whoever or whatever was lurking in that dark, empty campsite, I don't want to know. Isolated places already make me uneasy. Now even more so,